Today we find ourselves in Chapter 11, and we're going to be introducing ourselves to the chapter of, it's called A World in Flames, and it focuses on the period of time from 1931 to 1941. Before getting into it, we'll start with some essential questions that we're going to talk about for us, the rest of the unit. Number one is, could the World War II have been prevented? And number two is, why do some people fail to respond to injustice while others try to prevent injustice? Those two questions are going to discuss or guide us as we go through most of this important information. So, to prelude what we're going to talk about, not in the first section but in the second section, but kind of as an introduction, something we've all heard about is Pearl Harbor. And in Pearl Harbor, after the Japanese forces attacked Americans, you see a lot of people who are signing up to fight and try to change the way we think, from an isolationist state to a let's be involved and win the war. What I want to do is have a little focus here and just show you about this person named Dory Miller. And he was a serviceman and a cook on the USS West Virginia. His boat was docked in Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. He heroically took over an anti-aircraft gun when his commanding officer was fatally wounded. He won the Navy Cross for his courageous actions during that battle, and on November 25th, 1944, he was officially listed as presumed dead, a year after his escort cruiser was torpedoed in the Pacific. So in this section, we're going to talk about how the United States tried to avoid war, coming up to the incursion from Japan that's actually draw us into the war, and then what are some of the things that are going to happen us. So the first thing we'll do is draw a connection. The surprise attacks of December 7th, 1941 at Pearl Harbor are very similar to what happened and what we experienced on September 11th in 2001. Here we had two planes flew in the World Trade Center buildings in New York City. A third airliner struck the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and the fourth airliner crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Almost 3,000 people died in these attacks, and hundreds of thousands of people witnessed them firsthand. Also on the news, it was just kind of one of those things, a moment of living history. Now, for me, I was alive during that time, so it's kind of hard because I see it and I feel it, and I remember where I was at when it happened. Now, the same was for the generation before ours, before mine, which was during Pearl Harbor. The same thing, the surprise attack that brought a nation together and said, how do we defeat this enemy that's causing a lot of problems for us, and what can we do? So, looking at Pearl Harbor and looking at what happened, first thing is, after experiencing World War I, many Americans and Europeans didn't want to be involved in such wars ever again. Americans believed that some of the European nations are just always going to fight, and there's no reason for us to step in, because remember, we're still dealing with the remnants of the Great Depression. The New Deal is not working, and we just want to avoid everybody else's problems and stay with our own. So, as another war brewed out overseas during those 1930s, we were torn between ignoring it and using our influence, or else being involved. But then we're going to have to figure out, what is our actual role? If we were reluctant to enter at first, after the conflict hits us, the U.S. soil, we're devoted to making sure that we win. So when we look at here, you see this is the Hawaiian Islands in the Pacific Ocean. I want to say that some content knowledge beforehand is the attack is going to take place on a Sunday morning at a time calculated to create a great surprise. A Japanese launched their attack from 6 aircraft carriers about 275 miles out to sea. The attack included 360 Japanese aircrafts. The United States lost 5 battleships and other lighter airships of 188 aircrafts. And more than 2,300 American soldiers and civilians were killed during this. The Japanese lost between 29 and 60 aircrafts, 5 midget submarines, and fewer than 100 men in this process. So when you're looking at where Pearl Harbor is, this is where we're looking at. The whole idea is OAHU, OU. Okay, so here's the island right here in the center. To zoom in, so Pearl Harbor is located on the island of Oahu near Honolulu. The United States began to build naval bases in Pearl Harbor back in 1908, so we're talking about 20 some years beforehand. So we knew this was going to be a place, a destination for ships to be at. And the Japanese, by trying to defeat us on our own land, knew that if they took out a giant military base, it was going to leave us handicapped during this period of time. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, Hawaii was still just a territory of the United States. It was not a state of the Union at that point in time. The main thing is to talk about that there are two different waves that came in. The first thing was the 7:40 wave, the 7:40 in the morning. You see this on the blue, where they came in and they attacked from all aspects to hit the Pearl Harbor Tor. And then an hour later, another wave came in and attacked from the other side. So why do you think the Japanese would have planned two different waves? Well, they launched these aircraft carriers, and time was needed to get additional planes ready to hit the air. But think about what would happen after attack. You'd have people who were there trying to help and save people. You would have people trying to get their bearings back together. And in this process, creating the second wave really created more casualties than what the typical one front attack would have actually happened. So, to summarize this is Will Ware, a sailor aboard the USS Ward during the attack on Pearl Harbor. He states, "We saw a lot of planes diving down, and we thought the Army Air Force was practicing again. We didn't know it was two planes over us, and they were so low that you could see the pilots in the plane. They dropped bombs on each side of us, but missed. Then saw a big red ball, which signified that they were Japanese planes. Well, we knew we were at war." So again, the surprise attack comes in the idea of being on a military base in Pearl Harbor. They didn't know what to expect, because was it just a practice run from their own brothers and sisters, or was it something more? So you're going to have this speech, and we're going to talk about this in more depth in Section 2, but just to kind of get through and reiterate how important and how this shift is going to happen. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt gives a speech to Congress on December 8th in 1941, and it states, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval air forces of the Empire of Japan. No matter how long it takes to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people, in their righteous might, will win through absolute victory. I ask that Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attacks by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire. Again, the next 2 days when we're talking and we're discussing all these other things that are happening, it's going to be hard to fathom the giant change and the shift from FDR from what was happening before in the mainland of America and the beliefs that change after this part. So, in your notes, I want you to answer these following questions, and you're going to see these into your vocabulary section. So why would the Japanese have planned those two different ways, which I kind of discussed already? Why did the Japanese decide to attack Pearl Harbor instead of the mainland west coast of the United States? And why was this attack so devastating for the nation? And what does Roosevelt refer to as infamous?